Good morning, everybody, and thank you for giving me your attention today. Most of my talk is about how precious your attention is, so I really appreciate it. I'm super excited to be here with this panel, and special shout out to Township of Langley. You guys cannot believe how edgy it is to use a sad face sticker. It's probably earth-shaking on a continental scale. So I spent a few years working with the City of Vancouver Sustainability Group and also working between the communications and planning departments at Metro Vancouver. The reason I'm standing here today is because I, with my coworker Lindsay Popes, implemented a community-based social marketing recycling pilot test project, and we saw an increase of 250% of diversion from garbage, which I would say is pretty much unheard of. I've been asked to talk about water conservation today, which I will do in a few minutes. But first, quick definition of terms. So this basically says everything is behavior. As I was working with CBSM, I was wondering why the CBSM method recommends the specific things it does. So I did what I always do, which is I went to the back of the book and I read all the studies that were cited. And then I went to the back of the studies and I read all the studies they cited. I read books, I called up researchers in their offices and asked them questions. So I'm going to share my general model of what drives behavior and a little bit about what I call compassionate systems. Our core assumption about behavior is that we make conscious choices about how we're going to behave. So the general model is usually something like this, that education changes our values and our values drive our behavior. And what became clear to my research is that this assumption is almost totally wrong. This assumption is almost totally wrong, and so all of the programs we build on this assumption are almost totally wrong. So I'm going to sum up years of research in the next 2 minutes. We treat thinking like it's effortless. We imagine thoughts are like clouds in the sky, and the sky is so big there's always room for more thoughts. But in fact, thoughts are not like clouds in the sky. Thoughts are very effortful. They're more like running a marathon. Now, all of our conscious thought happens in the prefrontal cortex of our brain. This is one of the last parts of our brain to evolve, and it's very energy intensive. They say our brain is a muscle, and just like a muscle, our brain gets food to do work from glucose in the bloodstream. This is the guru. This is Dr. Roy Baumeister with his research material on the link between glucose and cognition. So he's found our prefrontal cortex can only get enough food for just a few hours of thought each day. So thinking really is like running a marathon. If you can survive for just a few hours, you're doing pretty good. And like running a marathon, when your energy is used up, you have to take a rest. You can't do anymore. So thinking and decision making is finite. There's only so much you can do, and then you can't do any more. So we can only think for a few hours each day, and we have a lot of demands on our brain. You're listening to me right now. Maybe you have a job later tonight. You have a relationship that you want to maintain. You have friends that you want to see. Choices as small as what to wear each day or what you're going to eat all use up this attention time, your conscious time. And when that is used up, it's gone, and you have to rest. Now, when you use someone's attention for your programs, they can't use it for something else. So when we demand attention for our programs, we often end up stabbing each other in the back. We take attention that another program needs. So when you take attention for your work, it can't be used to fight for women's rights. It can't be used for famine relief. It can't be used to advocate against pipelines. So you need to make sure your project is very important. So we can think for just a few hours each day, and the rest of our time, we're operating on habits, we're operating on rules of thumb, or we're reacting to the social or the physical context that we're in. Now, if these few hours were all we were capable of, we would literally still be living in caves. So how did we get to this place in a big building with lights and heat and finely woven clothes? Well, we've developed ways to cope. So this is the big thing I want you to hear. I want to invite you to look at our world and look at our programs, look at our culture, look at all our systems as coping mechanisms. So these are the ways that we extend our cognitive capacity. So I'm going to ask you to look at all our behavioral strategies as ways we deal with constraints in our brain. So to give a little scale, I think we can break up the drivers of our choice and behavior into 3 general fields. So the tiny little tip of this pyramid is our conscious behavior. The area in the middle is social behavior, and the huge area at the bottom is the systemic behavior. So the tip is the stuff we think about, the middle is the stuff we let our social group decide for us, and the bottom is the stuff that the system just determines and we tend to obey. Now, rather than trying to give some theory behind these, I'm just going to try to organize a bunch of common strategies into these respective areas. So these are all going to be familiar to you, but they change behavior in very different ways. And some of them you probably don't even think of as behavior change. So, in the tip. In the tip, we have things like education, documentary films, books, petitions, crowdfunding, pricing mechanisms. Pink Shirt Day, Pink Ribbon campaigns, Movember. In the middle, things like fashion, music, sports, politics, religion, culture, what brand of phone you use. Things like the Pink Ribbon campaign have a huge social behavioral component, but it's interesting, they're not actually, wearing a pink ribbon does not cure cancer. So the behavior that is socially transmitted through wearing a pink ribbon is the behavior of wearing a pink ribbon. Not so effective for cancer. In the bottom, in the systemic area, things like zoning codes, energy generation systems, vehicle efficiency standards, building codes, pension programs, and huge amounts of the physical world we live in shape our behavior. The chair you're sitting in, the flooring underneath you, the clothes you're wearing, all of this, where light switches are, all of these tiny, unnoticeable things actually shape our behavior profoundly throughout the day. Public consultation is up in the tip. Things like the shower timers that Team PowerSmart hands out, the little egg timer that you flip over when you're in the shower so that you take a 4-minute shower. So that's up in the tip. Whereas changing out the shower head to a less water, a more water efficient shower head is a systemic intervention. Lots of advertising. Advertising that tries to sell you on the quality of the product is very much up in the tip. Advertising that uses more emotion or social cues, of course, is in the middle. Speed limit signs. So the speed limit signs on the road are in the tip of the pyramid. They're trying to get your attention. Whereas the speed you end up driving on the road in the group of cars is a response to your social context. And something like the scooters that are speed limited, so they only go like 30 kilometers an hour, you don't need a motorcycle license to drive them, that's a systemic approach. They actually limit the behavioral possibility through regulating the scooter itself. Recycling education, of course, is up in the tip. The social norms that Tess talked about are in the middle. Things like packaging regulations to eliminate the need for recycling entirely is a systemic response. The ocean-wise wallet cards, so you know what fish to buy, is right up in the tip, whereas regulations on overfishing are a systemic response. For CBSM, signage, prompts, and most of the feedback are up in the tip of the pyramid. Social norms in the middle, and some aspects of feedback are in the middle. Social media, things like the Avaz petitions, Upworthy videos, these are all trying to work up in the tip of the pyramid. When social media is used to provide social proof, that's happening in the middle. So if you are tweeting photographs of the Stolen Sisters March for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, you're saying, I am here. You're offering social proof. You're not being persuasive. You are just showing the norm. So social media can be used in a couple different ways. I want to make a special little side note talking about regulation as talking about some of the regulation up in the tip versus the system. Regulating behavior is very hard, and it's never totally effective. So these are the laws that, for example, require you to wear a seatbelt, don't text while you're driving, or whatever. Speed limits, no smoking bans. These are all asking for your attention, and they're never totally effective. But regulating the system is totally effective. So every car sold must now have seatbelts installed. There's 100% compliance with that. Now, because so many people still don't wear seatbelts, even though their car has one, now there's regulations in some jurisdictions requiring that airbags be installed. So again, this is a systemic regulation, not a behavior regulation. And again, 100% compliance to that. The last on the list, things like nutritional labeling, both on the box of food and in fast food restaurants, that's all happening up in the tip. Green labeling systems, corporate social responsibility, shareholder activism, apps on your smartphone, things like the Nest thermostat. These are all things that are asking for your attention. So I'd like you to pause and appreciate how much we are trying to shoehorn into that tiny little tip of the pyramid there. So you have to ask yourself what chance your program has when you're trying to compete with so little brain space with so many other issues. So I want to make sure you clearly understand the difference in scale between changing the system and trying to do education or outreach or other attention-demanding approaches. And I want to remind you that when we ask people to pay attention to our issue, we are asking them to not pay attention to someone else's issue. Let's be honest, most of our problems are first world problems. So really almost every issue is more important than our issues. So we need to be very judicious, I would say. It's profoundly selfish of us to ask for attention, and it's profoundly ineffective of us to ask for attention. Changing the system is the only effective way to change behavior. It's may be very hard to accomplish, but it's often the only effective way. Let me say that again a little differently. So everyone knows changing the system is very powerful, but it's also very difficult. So because it's so difficult, we often end up deciding to do something that we feel we can accomplish. And so we decide to just do education, or we do outreach, we print up brochures. So when what we're doing doesn't work, we decide to do more of it. And then we're surprised when it still doesn't work. But it doesn't work. And we need to do something different. What works is to change the system. If you can't change the system, it would usually be better to do nothing at all than to try to fight for attention with all these other issues. And I've heard all the stories why change is so hard. People don't care. People are stupid. It's all about dollars. I've heard it all, and I find it quite hateful. So the truth is we have limitations. We quite simply can only do so much. So rather than asking for resources that people don't have, we need to help them by building systems that support them. So I call these systems compassionate systems because they're fundamentally loving of human beings and of our limits. So, to sum up, much of our behavior is determined by how we deal with the constraints on our cognitive capacity. So, not only is our capacity of thinking and choice not infinite, it's actually very small. Because of that, we've built systems to support us, and I call these human-centered systems compassionate systems. Now, I'm going to talk about water conservation, and you might guess I'm not going to have a lot of nice things to say. I think we get a lot of things wrong with water conservation and not much right, so this is going to be kind of a mixed bag of my thoughts on that. Let's start with the notion of water conservation itself. So here in Metro Vancouver, most people will tell you it rains all day, every day. They call this the wet coast. We have problems with moss and mold. So the mindset here is that we have too much water. So the frame of water conservation is wrong right from the start. People will subconsciously reject it, so you're fighting uphill. What we do have is very seasonal water. We are drowned, and then we get drought. If we're going to talk about water conservation, and for me that is a big if, we need to talk about the drought season, not water conservation. Now, water conservation is right up there with riding a bicycle and recycling, so why would I question it? I question it because of our limited cognitive capacity. So when I was at Metro Vancouver, I was asked to help out with some work on water conservation. So the engineer in charge of the water system had asked his outreach staffer to develop a little tag to hang on the hose outside your house, hang on the little hose faucet, that would tell you when your legal watering hours were. And basically they wanted me to come and tell them what a great idea this was, so they invited me to a meeting. And so I said, great, I would love to talk about water conservation, but first, can you send me some data on how much water is used by which users and where the losses in the system are? I asked for this information several times, and either they don't have it or they were unwilling to give it to me. But here's a chart for Canadian water use. The numbers may be quite general. Here in Metro Vancouver, there's an enormous amount of agriculture happening within the region, and much of the water flows through municipal pipes, or it's licensed by Metro Vancouver, for example, to withdraw from the Fraser. So is that counted as municipal or agriculture? I don't know. I've also heard numbers that between 10 and 25% of water loss simply leaks out of underground pipes, so that's a system problem, but again, where's the data? Now, according to this chart, in Canada, we have thermal energy generation using 8 times as much water as all of the cities in the country. Manufacturing uses twice as much, and agriculture, let's say at least as much, as all the people who live in municipalities, which only use 8% of the water. And yet we think it's a good idea to try to get the attention of 33 million people so we can wag our fingers at them and tell them they should take shorter showers and they should water their lawn less. So the amount of water that can be saved in your home is a rounding error compared to what's used in thermal energy generation. One regulation could transform water use in the energy industry. But instead, we think it's a good idea to fight up in the tip of the pyramid, battling for attention against countless important issues, to ask every single Canadian to take shorter showers. So the compassionate way to approach things is to try to find the fewest people that need to pay attention to a problem, not the most. So that's just setting yourself up for failure. I'm just going to tell a couple more stories about water and behavior. As I said, I was asked to approve a tag to hang on your outdoor faucet telling you what your hours are. So let's play this out a little bit. So the tags have to be delivered. It would be best if the city would actually physically install them on the taps, but that's expensive. So they might just send them in the mail. A huge number are going to be immediately discarded as junk mail. Another huge chunk are going to sit in your kitchen junk drawer. And a very tiny number are actually going to be installed by the resident. So I would say the tactic is likely to be a failure right from the beginning. But even if the resident does put the tag on the faucet, that might be the wrong place. So you've put on your gardening clogs, you've put on your jacket, you've walked outside, you're bending down to turn on the water, and you see the tag that says this isn't your time. What are you going to do? Are you going to go back inside and take off your jacket and take off your clogs and come back out at the right time? I think the chances are you're just going to water the lawn. That's what you came out for. So when was the watering choice made? The watering choice was made inside the house before you even put on your jacket. So maybe something like a fridge magnet is a better idea than a hose tag. I don't know, that needs testing. But to me, the behavioral scenario of the hose tag doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, following these watering times, the watering restrictions, a few years ago here in Metro, there were summertime pressure drops in the water system, to the point that there was a risk that if there was a fire at the edges of the water system, there wouldn't be enough water pressure in the fire hydrants for the fire department to fight the fire. one explanation for this pressure drop is that too many people were watering their lawns all at the same time, thanks to the municipal watering restrictions. So this is a problem the engineers created with potentially tragic consequences. So maybe a better idea would be to say water any day you want as long as it's before 10 a.m. Or water any time you want at all as long as no one else in your block is watering. We need to try different approaches to this. For a pricing example, I'm on a CBSM forum where people can post questions and whatnot. So someone posted a question asking about using pricing mechanisms and proposing changing the water rates twice a year to accommodate the drought season. More expensive in drought, less expensive in the rainy season. If you think of this from a cognitive capacity perspective, you can see this is a disaster. So you're asking people to pay attention to your probably bad municipal messaging twice a year. We already ignore government messaging, and now we have twice as much to ignore. Now, my last thought on water. It's well established that if you build roads that are wide and straight, people will drive faster. And if you build roads that are narrow and twisty, they slow down. So we built a system with enormous hot water tanks that provide a never-ending flow of hot water. And then we wag our fingers at people and tell them to take shorter showers. This is insane. I think it's abusive. We are shaming people for behaving perfectly according to the system. We need to change the context. So when my landlord replaced the hot water heater in our house, I asked him to put in a tiny little tank. And now my family takes very short showers. So my experience with community-based social marketing was fairly unproductive. CBSM does a lot of its work up in the tip of the pyramid. CBSM does insist on very high standards of data and testing, which is excellent. And these high standards allowed me to prove in my work that changing the system was the most effective approach. Trying to get attention is a very difficult task. And even if you're successful, you do it at the expense of other issues. So our first approach should always be to try to change the system.